I like how all your podcasts just start sort of like mid-conversation.
Yeah, well, that's what happens. I'll just start saying some dumb thing, and this one will just start recording.
Right,
yeah, exactly. Go live.
This is what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome
right.
to episode 61, 62 of the Three Body
Is
Problem.
it?
We're live
Is
at
it 62?
LABScon. This is 62. We're live at LABScon 2025. Super excited. Juanito, how are you feeling?
I'm tired.
You're all tired.
No, but I'm surprisingly prepared for this one. I have a few slides, and it makes me feel a little bit more like put together.
Super excited to have Costin join us as well. Costin
Here in
Paperman.
spirit.
If you're going to be watching this on video, we have Costin. You'll see Costin, but if you're listening to it on your podcast,
Yes.
Costin
Having a
is here
quiet
with us
day.
at LABScon. He's going to be quiet tonight. He's got COVID with a bad throat, so we're going to leave him up there. Let me introduce our guest. We actually have a guest to kick off the show, Lindsay Freeman. You're speaking tomorrow here at LABScon on our keynote day about a topic that we've discussed on the show, which is this kind of these mercenary folks.
Well, let her
broadcasting
present
their
it,
crimes,
right? So the subtext being here, this is effectively, we're calling this FOMO-con, like the amount of keynote day talks that are off the record is, way higher than ever before. And, phenomenal for all of us that get to be here. Bit sad for some of the folks that can't make it to the room. So you obviously don't have to talk about anything that you don't want to talk about. You can save it for tomorrow. But it's a fascinating topic that you've already written on. So if you want to kind of go through some of it.
Yeah, I can definitely talk in general terms. And I will say my team is very jealous in just seeing all the secret talks that I think makes it more alluring for them.
Hold the microphone at the top here. They brought the transmitter.
There.
Is this better?
Much better. Go ahead.
But yeah, I'm happy to talk about it in broad strokes since at this point we've sort of published that we're doing the investigation. Tomorrow I'll go into the weeds on specific details that I won't talk about here, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Well, just to frame it, right? For folks that didn't read, I believe it was a Lawfare piece, right?
Yes.
So if I remember correctly, we're basically, you and your team are looking into the, I don't want to say the allegation, the notion that the Wagner Group has essentially been committing war crimes in some capacity, right? It's something you want to take to the ICC. Is that?
Yeah, so to just give a little backstory on how this came about, when we were working on the Russia-Ukraine case, which is how I met you, and looking at Russia's cyber attacks on Ukraine's critical infrastructure, we were sort of in the mix with Ukrainians and different people, and the Wagner Group came up as a topic of interest. There were sort of other partner NGOs that were seeing if we wanted to work on it, and because this group is so online, it really lends itself to our skill set, which is OSINT.
Right.
And so we started by just kind of doing a pre-investigation scoping. The other thing was also we did get access to a very large database of leaked documents, which also assisted, and I'll talk about that.
Is that okay? I'm assuming, is this leaked? And you can tell me that you can't talk about it, but is this leaked to you folks directly, or is it something?
Other people have it. There's a few journalists who have written some pieces on it.
Right.
C4ADS is the one that holds it in a database. So we actually got it from two different sources. But it has some fun things like Prigozhin's calendar in it we're fun to work with. So that's sort of one of the things I'll get into tomorrow. But basically, we started by doing what we call pre-investigation scoping, and we looked at the Wagner Group's operations in 6 countries, and looking Ukraine, Syria, Libya, Mali, Sudan, and Central African Republic, just to see if we could tease out sort of a case theory that would make sense.
Right.
Because my background is working at the ICC, that's just sort of where I navigate in terms of looking under the Rome Statute framework. But under the Rome Statute for the ICC, there are other avenues for accountability in national courts. There's several European countries that have universal jurisdiction.
Right.
So the ICC is definitely not the end-all and be-all of these types of cases.
That's good to hear.
Yeah. So after a while, we sort of narrowed the scope of our investigation into Sudan, Mali, Central African Republic, where there had been a huge spike in violence against civilians working in the mines right after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So our theory of the case was, they thought they'd take Kyiv in a day. They didn't. And so they realize they're going to be sanctioned and need sort of long-term funding. So pressure comes down from above of we need these gold mines to be making more. And it results in the Wagner Group running those mines to be violent. And we were kind of looking at a multi-territorial case.
Right.
When Prigozhin was killed and his plane went down, Utkin, all of that echelon of leadership, we realized there was no one you could really hold accountable for what happened across all three countries. So we, for a variety of reasons, put all our effort into Mali and went deep, which I think was the good one, because right now the Sahel is probably the hottest hotspot in Africa.
Really?
I mean, well, I'll say Sudan has a lot, obviously, going on, horrible atrocities happening there. But the Sahel, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, is really kicking it up and should be an area of the world more people are paying attention to. It's been about 3 years now through that process of investigating them, looking at their war crimes. But then we got creative with some case theories, which, you might ask me about.
Why do you think the global response has been so uneven? In the past, when ISIS was posting beheading videos, the response was pretty drastic and dramatic. Nowadays, it's almost non-existent or rather uneven. Like many people here doesn't even know there's a conflict in Mali, for instance.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I think some of it is just conflict fatigue. I mean, you have what's going on in Ukraine, what's going on in Gaza, even in Africa, Sudan, understandably gets some attention. And just in the U.S., our own politics. It's pretty hard to get international news unless you're going looking for it as an American living in the U.S. So it is a good question as to why.
How does that affect our ability to understand?
Well, what kind of leverage do you get at that point, right? I think a lot of the time, public attention tends to sort of compound and drive this notion of actually showing one conflict as if it were more relevant and important than another, and not by virtue of human lives or whatnot, but just people in America just so happen to have gotten really behind this one conflict and not the other. In the absence of that, does it feel like it cripples your ability to kind of action on some of these things, or is it all just by the law, business as usual, we will tackle all of them as we go, right?
No, I mean, certainly there's some conflicts because of the geopolitics that surround it are getting more attention, and that public attention does translate into pressure on prosecutors to move, and so resources get put on where the big case is. So the media has a very powerful role to play in directing our attention and seeing what victims actually get justice in these conflicts. And that was one of the reasons we had Associated Press published an article on us, and then I had the Lawfare piece. But one reason to start talking about it publicly, which we usually don't do while there's an ongoing investigation and right now potentially some other new litigation, is without that public pressure and people caring, you can't motivate prosecutors to act. And so, the Wagner Group really did drop off people's radar with Prigozhin's death, even though they really didn't miss much of a beat in sort of their new iteration.
Well, I did mean to ask about that, right? So I followed along through to Prigozhin's death, and then as interested as I am in it, as you said, right? There's a certain amount of fatigue that sets in with all these things. I have been curious if, is there a loss of continuity with Wagner? Does it become a new group? This is me being entirely ignorant of the situation. Post Prigozhin's death, I went into a coma. I have no clue what the hell happened at that point, right?
Yeah.
Are they still rolling in the same, fatigues?
Some of them are. So the whole Prigozhin network, which was many, many different companies internationally and all of that, I would say is more broken down now. And so what's happened to Wagner is different in different countries. So in Ukraine, they did get subsumed under the Ministry of Defense in Russia, and they are fighting as Russian armed forces. And now we will treat them that way and not as mercenaries. In Africa, there's been a lot more kind of loyalty or a culture. I mean, one thing is Wagner, the private military company, and then the other is the brand.
Right.
And they've cultivated a really powerful brand. Like, I hate to say it, but they're kind of good at their own marketing and doing this. So in Africa, the Russian Ministry of Defense created something called Africa Corps to take it over. How that's happened in different countries, though, has not been a smooth transition. In Mali, they've finally made the switch, but they kind of still refer to themselves online as Wagner. And in Mali, we're pretty sure like 80% of the people are the same, certainly the same commanders. And I'll sort of show some of that tomorrow of how we saw who was in charge there and then who became in charge on the ground in Africa Corps. So there's definitely been they're figuring out their strategy after Prigozhin died. There wasn't a plan, and some people have rebelled against things. They're kind of finding their groove. But what I will say is, in terms of on the ground, at least in the Mali case, they have been fighting alongside the Malian armed forces nonstop with the same tactics throughout this transition. And one thing that's interesting legally about that, though, is before, when it was just the Wagner Group, it would be hard to hold Russia accountable for that. They don't have effective control. But now that it's under the Ministry of Defense as a state organ, now anything that happens can be attributed to Russia for state responsibility. So that's interesting. But there's a bunch of other people in the mix too. And so they're still trying to have their cake and eat it too, with plausible deniability. And some people doing other things, and then their formal Africa Corps.
Why has the courts been so slow to act, even in the presence of all this public evidence, people documenting their own crimes? One, and two, what has been the response to your efforts with submitting evidence, the Lawfare piece? What has happened since?
Yeah, so we submitted all the evidence we had in our filing to the International Criminal Court before the sanctions, and the Trump administration has sanctioned the ICC prosecutor, and that has paused our information sharing just as we navigate that legally, and has been a bit tricky. But we did sort of present to them in The Hague on our findings. And I mean, there's not much I can say, and I don't really know. They wouldn't tell me what they're doing, but there certainly was an interest in it. And I think, as a case, one thing that's kind of astounding is in the history of international criminal law, which sort of started with Nuremberg, but really got going in the early 1990s with the Balkans and Rwanda. In all this time, they never prosecuted a private military contractor. A mercenary has never been held individually accountable for any war crime, crime against humanity. So in terms of the precedent, especially right now where almost all military is moving towards privatization, that is the trend of warfare. I think if prosecutors don't start paying attention to this as an issue and taking action, it's going to be a huge oversight and sort of a glaring gap in showing that they're sort of behind the times. But I don't know what they're doing. And other action has happened, which I'll talk about more in the
Fair enough.
private session. We're definitely working with or trying to support other national law enforcement and other efforts.
Are you optimistic that there's going to be something that comes out of all of this, or is this one of those things where you're just kind of documenting it, hoping? Where's your head at that there's any sort of like energy to get this?
Yeah, I am optimistic, kind of because I have to be, especially this is the hardest investigations. You know, I've been doing war crimes for more than a decade, and the graphic content, because they are filming themselves and posting all of it, is sort of the worst I've ever seen. And, you know, just getting through the secondary trauma for my team has really been a large part of the process. So, yeah, I wouldn't be subjecting myself or anyone else to this if I didn't think that something would happen. And I do think, you know, there are people within different agencies who care about this as a passion project, you know, or just like they're going to stay on it. I believe that. And I also believe these guys travel and will travel.
Right.
And I'll talk a bit about that too. But yes, I do think, you know, this type of justice takes a long time, too long in my opinion. And that's one thing we're trying to change with introducing new investigation techniques and new tools, is to try and speed up the process, because it's way too slow, especially considering sort of the tempo of battle these days. Yes, but I'm hopeful something will happen.
So on that note, and particularly given the audience we have, not just at the conference, but, you know, ideally listening to this, it sounds like, I mean, from the work we've done together before, but also specifically in this case, it sounds like digital evidence and some, you know, cyber adjacent components have proven particularly valuable in this. Is there, essentially for the folks listening, like, is there something you're on the lookout for? Are there resources beyond, you know, the obvious that maybe some of the folks listening might be able to contribute to this sort of investigation? Like, how can folks try to move this along, and what could they be providing you that would actually, you know, materially advance the case?
That's a good question. I will say in the Russia-Ukraine sort of critical infrastructure, it's a lot more clear-cut where cyber threat intelligence fits into that. And this
we
is
have
more
OSINT researchers listening. There's, you know, there's all kinds of folks.
But for OSINT researchers, you know, there's just so much information. You know, we're trying to organize it and have it in a way that's accessible for lawyers. And I think a big part of what we do is translate things from these types of communities to something lawyers understand, because there is a pretty big gap now. And I think that being a translator in that way is sort of a skill in and of itself, and an important piece of the puzzle. Yeah, for this case, I don't know specifically. I mean, if anyone has good tools for preserving Telegram channels and can make that easier.
I'm looking for Silas in the crowd somewhere in here.
Yeah, there actually are a lot of tools we would like to build.
Allison Nixon.
And for large data leaks, or, you know, there's definitely, in terms of capability building, I think a lot of tools that could be really helpful. I mean, luckily we have someone on our team, somebody you introduced me to, who has that skill set. And through that, I think some of my other team members are sort of self-teaching and picking it up. But that's one where we always need help and support and ideas of, better ways to preserve, better ways to analyze, and just deal with speed and volume and finding the signal and the noise.
Well, we love a good OSINT CTF around here, so you know.
You mentioned Telegram, and I got a quick question on the responsibilities that these platforms bear. And do you think there's been a shift in the moderation at all? And what is their role in all of this?
Yes, and I will say, I'll talk about this in the presentation tomorrow, but one direct result of the pieces we put out publicly is they shut down the paid channel. the white uncles in Africa, 18
It was
plus.
the war influencers thing where people were monetizing this kind of atrocity.
Yeah, it was smaller because it was a paid channel and
right,
really bad stuff. I mean, it's all bad, even the non-paid channels. But they did shut it down and take their wallet or the money, and they're not happy about it.
Of course.
So we, have been watching them complain, and it's kind of interesting to follow those conversations and that reaction.
Right.
And yeah, I was saying the other day when you guys were speaking about this on the podcast, it was like, we've gotten people in different communities to be talking about war crimes, and even now we have like Wagner on Telegram debating what a war crime is. Like, it's like that is this little baby progress of at least they're thinking about it in some way. But on Telegram's culpability in there and just getting into the platform liability is like a whole other legal thing. And I think we're exploring some things there, but I think first and foremost, the people creating this content by killing people and doing awful things and posting it online should be the ones who are held responsible in this way. But I do think Telegram has a responsibility here. I think all these companies do. And I do think there might be some legal mechanisms.
Are there other platforms beyond Telegram where a lot of these atrocities being broadcasted?
I mean,
or is it a Telegram-specific problem?
Telegram's the main one. I mean, there's things across all of them. And, once it's on one, it sort of moves to another. A lot of stuff used to be on Twitter, but now that it's X and under Elon Musk, a lot of people aren't using it in the same way. TikTok, people are using that on Discord, sharing in Discord channels. So it's always changing the landscape. But I think because Telegram basically has no content moderation whatsoever.
Except for the French government.
Yes. Well, yeah. The French
I think that's what
government
Costin said, right? Like after the French government arrest, we started to see a lot of movement on moderation. It was on the
them
same
just
episode.
shutting down some of the paid channels, some of the hack and leak channels, but
So is it still ongoing today, or is all that public atrocity broadcasting more or less gone away?
Oh yeah, they're still going
It's still
today.
alive and
They
active today.
didn't stop a beat, which is why we need real accountability.
How do we close this accountability gap with all these legal frameworks being so uncertain? Is it even tractable and fixable? Or I'm trying to share your optimism.
Don't take away from her optimism. We need one of us has to
know what I
have
mean?
it.
Well, to be fair, I mean, me saying I'm optimistic is kind of funny given every day the conversations we're having. I'm having existential crises of what's happened to the international legal order and does this matter anymore? It's not a good time for international law. It's not a good time for human rights. It's not a good time for a lot of the work we're doing. So,
in that, if you don't mind, a bit of realpolitik or even just pragmatism, is there some I understand why, from a human dignity perspective, we would want to go after this as a war crime and as war criminals. I fully accept that. Given the circumstances, right? Are there adjacent things that we should be looking to leverage as other crimes that they just so happen to be sort of tripping over that may still have some leverage with either the US or the EU or whomever?
Yes, we're always looking for that, but you need a jurisdictional hook. And so when they're committing crimes in Mali alongside the Malian government, I mean, it's the junta government there that took power by coup. With very, very close ties to Russia. They're not investigating these crimes. So, they're obviously murder and torture and all these things are national crimes, but there just isn't a mechanism in the country for the Malian people to turn to, which is then when I think international law is most important to actually give them a pathway to it. But we are always thinking creatively. And yeah, war crimes and crimes against humanity as well are both charges that feel appropriate given
Right.
what's happening and that this
Right.
is happening in an armed conflict. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things where they're blatantly violating the laws of armed conflict. Of course, several other countries are doing that now.
I mean, I
So,
hate to play
I mean,
deal or
that's
no
the
deal
issue.
with like the kind of charges that we can press. I'm just saying, to the extent that we,
Might
that
be able to do something.
yeah, we just want them to,
Right.
to
Well,
feel some friction in the meantime, right?
Yeah, I always talk about the Al Capone got,
Right.
they prosecuted him on tax evasion charges. And that was some of what we were going for in the war crime for posting. There's the war crime of outrages on personal dignity, and there's precedent for trophy photos, beheading photos from Syria and Iraq being posted by
Right.
returning foreign fighters, and they were convicted for this war crime of outrages on personal dignity. And it is easier to prove because you don't have to prove they committed the crime. You have to prove that,
Right.
they posted it with the intent of,
Right. If you just ran into someone's head and decided to use it for marketing purposes, it still counts. Sorry, to be
Yeah.
extremely crass, right? But that's at the
Yeah.
point at which we're, kind of falling down the steps trying to
yeah.
tack something on.
But yeah, so our sort of theory was putting that out there because it's a little creative in dealing with some of the new stuff, but also it's easier to prove. So if you can't get on the ground in Mali and interview
Right.
witnesses, this is one you actually maybe could do, relying more heavily on remote investigation techniques and digital evidence. So that was our thinking. But we're always open to ideas.
Before I let you go, because we're running out of time, what happens next? Is your work and the submission to the ICC and all of that stuff done, or are you continuing to do work?
We are continuing to monitor to some degree, and we are working with some partners to find other output for the work we've already
Right.
done. And not all of that I can talk about. But we've also started a new investigation, which I can't talk about now, maybe next year.
Next,
But
off the record talk.
yeah, I will say that one is more sort of back to the cybers, and has
We like the
a bit more
cybers.
I got one last question.
Come on.
And just one last
Your
thing.
fourth
because
last question.
The sanctioning of the prosecutor affects your ability to communicate. Is that something you think goes away soon? Is there a replacement?
That is a ridiculous question. Who knows?
Yeah,
I mean,
no one
honestly,
knows.
look, I'll put cards on the table, right? Like we were going in for discussions. We went to a Microsoft event at the ICC around sort of the war crimes in Ukraine, and at the time you had all this momentum. We're hoping to sort of advise and like sort of further push, and you cannot. Like, if you think NSO is having a hard time with sanctions, an actual legitimate above board organization dealing with that, I don't know how you possibly keep things moving, right? So it's this like
that's where my pessimism and like.
Oh, I think your
Give up
pessimism
attitude
would have
comes
been
from.
there regardless of and mine too, right? Like when it comes to I think the law and cyber seldom cross in any sort of, I'm not going to say in any meaningful way, but definitely in any way that we would consider sort of particularly fruitful, which is actually how we met, right? Like I expressed a certain amount of disrespect for the original project you were working on, and we ended up, I think you were incredibly gracious in my ignorance, and we ended up working on this together, which is phenomenal. Like we got all these folks involved. But you look at that situation with the ICC, and I think the work that you guys are doing, quite rightly so, because it's the right work to do. And then there's watching this organization and whether they're going to spring back to life, right?
Yeah, and I'm not sure the ICC will survive this.
Wow.
And
That's huge.
I mean, it might, but it will be sort of a ghost of itself. But things are cyclical, and at some point the tides will turn.
Human
and
rights will come back.
People
Yeah,
might
like-
be craving justice after this.
Right.
A lot of these institutions all came out of post-World War II.
Sure.
And so when I talk to students, I say, what you should be thinking about is, what does the International Legal Order 3.0 look like?
Right.
Like if you were to rebuild it now.
Like on the blockchain or something.
Yeah, put it on
Quantum.
blockchain.
If Costin has
Yeah.
his way, we'll get some
blockchain.
crypto in there.
Yeah,
some magic
AI
money.
judges,
Some
AI
magic money to
lawyers.
fund it.
AI judges. I mean, I like where you're going. You could probably get some funding for this. Like real. There's
where's the
probably
VC?
folks in the crowd who would fund this idea.
Yeah,
so.
but I will say on the case of Syria, which the ICC doesn't have jurisdiction over, there have been lots of cases in German courts and other national jurisdictions which have been very successful.
Right.
So there are models of success. Again, this does not break through the news at all, but consistently from other colleagues and people we work with in this space, they are having wins on
Right.
putting torturers into prison in different places. So, right now it's hard, but our job is not easy on purpose. We all got into this to fight, so that's kind of part of the deal with this kind of work.
That's a great place to end it. Thank you very much, Lindsay. Thank you for your work, and thank you for coming and sharing it with us. I'm
Yeah.
looking
Thanks so
forward
much.
very
It's
the
much.
best to your
Thanks for
team.
having me.
Keep bringing us this. Hopefully, we can all support in some capacity. I think it's actually quite rewarding.
Yeah. Well, I think the one we're working on now, which I can say more broadly, is looking at spyware surveillance and that kind of
we
thing.
like the sound of that.
Yeah,
All right.
that's what we're looking at now. So
Okay.
that's one where I do want to really engage a lot of the people who are here.
Come back on the
And
show. And
Yeah,
Yeah.
please.
Next time.
So, offline, I'll talk to people about that a bit. And
Start peppering the ideas.
Exactly.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Lindsay.
Lindsay.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Perfect.
That was fantastic. Thank you very much.